Ladies and gentlemen, I am Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. It is September 26th, 2022. This is your daily Ukraine update, and we are going to be asking ourselves, is it possible that Russia's mobilization is somehow going even worse? Let's get into it. First off, when we look at the map, you can see there are no major changes to the front. This, of course, is probably bad news for Russia, who needs to, as fast as possible, close these major holes on the eastern side of the Oskil River. And while they certainly haven't done so, and in fact seem to be fixated on holding Lyman, which possibly is meant to be the linchpin of this larger defensive effort here. But as you guys can see, there's a lot of bigger problems, namely that this gigantic gap has peeled Russia away from its left natural barrier, its left natural defensive line, meaning that it's much easier to fold up lines that are being pushed back like this. And you can also see down here, Belohorivka is also being pushed back, and Russia may find itself in the same situation that it put the Ukrainians in 3 months ago, where a large salient is at risk of getting surrounded. And if that happens, of course, it won't matter how well the Russian troops defended Lyman, because they are going to be forced to withdraw or risk annihilation. But that's not the real story here. The real story today is just how badly things are going for Russia. And for that, we, of course, are going to turn to ground.news, which helps us discern how the same story is covered across the political spectrum, absolutely essential in any conflict involving the Russian Federation. And if you're interested in checking them out for free, a link is in the description, or you can subscribe and support the team. Anyway, let's see if we can cover this story without getting demonetized. A potential draftee is detained after shooting at a draft office in Russia's Kursk region. That's actually a pretty YouTube safe headline right there. Now, the gunman has identified themselves as a 25-year-old. This is in near Siberia, Irkutsk, and this is probably believed, when we look at how it's covered, it's actually covered almost the same, regardless of political bend, because, of course, there isn't really anybody who's in a hurry to see Russia mobilize a bunch of unwilling conscripts in a war that never should have taken place in the first place. But when we look, we can see that this appears to be an individual who has, is obviously extremely does not want to be drafted, and views and is expressing that frustration, we'll say, and possibly feels that he is defending himself and his fellow Russians from, again, a perhaps unjust war. And yep, he shouted, "Nobody is going to go anywhere." But you could see that there's definitely a lot. This is part of a larger response against the Russian mobilization plan. Recruitment offices are torched, large protests, and it's not really clear that this is actually going to result in a lot of good quality manpower increases for Russia. For that analysis, of course, Institute for the Study of War has a great breakdown from Frederick Kagan, and he discusses the fact that basically throughout the Cold War, Russia used a system called the cadre and reserve system. And this was the idea that if the Soviet Union ever had to fight a big war again, it would do so by drafting all of its military-ready soldiers, all of its military-ready men. And they would be military ready because as teenagers, they would do 2 years of mandatory military service, perform some exercise, get themselves to the point where they're proficient in combat tasks, and then they were put back out into the civilian economy. And this system relied on the fact that if there was a general war, they could reach back into the general population of men and draw them in and staff up their units. And these units would actually already have professional full-time non-commissioned officers, and a small number of professional soldiers, all of whom would be expected to help the unit grow from, let's say, a battalion with just a few dozen soldiers would receive a complement, would receive their conscripts, and suddenly that battalion would quickly swell to the thousands strong that it doctrinally should be. And this system was basically the European manpower solution from the end of the 19th century through the Cold War. A small professional army whose primary role was to keep the infrastructure in place to balloon into a giant conscript force in a matter of weeks, or even days in some cases. The problem is Russia sort of tried to become an all-volunteer military because they looked at the U.S. military and realized that full-time professional soldiers were actually vastly better at especially limited war and unconventional military tasks than conscripts could ever be. But it's very expensive, and the U.S. model certainly can do it. But for most of the militaries, right, this was it was simply too expensive, and Russia sort of found this. So instead, it turned into this weird topsy-turvy military where there's some professional soldiers and there's also some conscripts who only get 1 year of training. And if you've ever been in the military, you know that a year of training, it's not very sufficient, especially if it's 1 year you got a decade prior. So what does all this mean? It means that there's really not much that Russia can do to get combat-ready troops really this year. You might see in 6 months, there might be the possibility of combat-effective units entering the field if Russia can equip them properly. But that in and of itself is its own tremendous challenge. So all in all, it sounds like Russia is not really going to be in a position to scale up its forces rapidly with good quality, trained, even former conscripts. One other news story, though, that I think is important to cover is that Lavrov, the Russia's top diplomat, I think, has said, foreign minister, has pledged full protection for any territory annexed by Russia. Now, you and I know, of course, that they're going to hold some sham referendums. Those referendums are going to say that these regions want to join Russia. Russia will immediately bring those regions into the Russian state as full territories, and then it will confer upon them the full protection of the Russian state, which may just be a pretext. It may be a pretext to say, hey, look, now that the DNR and LNR are part of the Russian state, it makes sense for us to have a general mobilization, a general conscription to defend Mother Russia. But one of the implications in his speech, and you can watch it here, is that the full protection and maintaining Russia's territorial integrity also entails nuclear weapons. And he's being deliberately vague. This is part of the game, is that, yes, Russia is a nuclear power. And yes, nuclear powers, if say, the U.S. Army was to attempt to march on Moscow, Russia would use nuclear weapons to defend its sovereign territory. That's almost a certainty. But will it use nuclear weapons to defend this territory that it's sort of arbitrarily or randomly annexed? I think the answer is no, but Russia is deliberately choosing vague words like full protection to make the West doubt and wonder if defending these breakaway regions is going to actually result in a nuclear conflict, which the UN and the international community overwhelmingly does not want. And this is sort of the danger that we're in. Russia itself also does not want a nuclear conflict. The US has clearly warned Russia that they would achieve, if they were to use nuclear weapons offensively, it would make them an international pariah on the scale that no country has been in a long time. Of course, It's hard because Ukraine is not subject to the nuclear umbrella of the United States. We have not pledged to use our nuclear weapons to defend Ukraine the way we actually do have a pledge to defend NATO countries. NATO countries, of course, due to Article 5, we are bound by treaty to treat an attack on any one of those NATO countries as an attack on the continental United States itself. Anyway, guys, I hope that gives you a little bit of context and understanding some of this nuclear gamesmanship that is going on right now. Of course, you may have noticed that YouTube has cracked down a lot on combat videos, especially my breakdowns of these videos, even when I try to select them carefully. So if you want to support the channel and see the combat video breakdowns that I can't show you here, you want to become a member of the Patreon. Check out the link in the description, and I'll see you guys in the next one.